Today we're painting skin, and it's my fab part of painting any miniature. I find painting skin very nostalgic since I do watercolor portraits since I was 12 years old. I have a ton of miniature painting tutorials on painting skin, but those are mostly via our sketch and glaze. Sketch and glaze is the most enjoyable method, in my opinion, when painting skin, but it can be very time consuming. Painting skin via slop chop or double slop chop can be very tricky though. It can be tricky because the dry brushing can be rough. And don't tell me about the moist dry brushing because that is very time consuming in my opinion. I'll show you a more effective technique later in the video. The problem with even our double slop chop is that I have to glaze on top, do glaze highlights to smoothen the skin. And I know that layering and highlighting via glazes is not an option for most of you guys, especially if you're painting an army. So unlike my previous videos, the video today focuses on less time-consuming methods. Also, our skin today is highly inspired from Trench Crusade aesthetics. Today we're painting rotting flesh or rotting skin, which is, like I said, highly inspired from Trench Crusade aesthetics. I have no idea where I got this miniature, but it kinda reminds me of Trench Crusade. That's why I chose this miniature for this video tutorial. I really like the design of this miniature, but again, I don't know where I got it. Although it reminds me of Trench Crusade, it also kinda reminds me of Patrick from SpongeBob. Oh, I'm sure we'll get another comment that airbrushing is the most efficient way to paint skin. So, I have to say that this video was designed for people who doesn't want to use the airbrush or doesn't have an airbrush. Oh, I just realized that slop chop is a very exclusive word or term, so we can do that because slop chop should be dirty, fast, quick, and ugly. So we're calling this method chop suey. Our method today is reliant or heavy on dry brushing so that we get a good base for the speed paints later. Also, we'll be using a ton of washes to add more color depth and contrast to our painting. Other than adding depth to our painting, the washes smoothens down our dry brushing. I'm Don, welcome to my channel. This channel is supported by all these awesome brands. Also, special thanks to The Army Painter for making this video possible. Now we paint. We start with purple underpainting. We are using Diabolic Plum from the Magenta Striate. You could also start with dark browns, but I feel for the painting of this miniature, purple has more character. You can do heavier dry brushing than usual since we plan to use a ton of washes later. Heavier dry brushing simply means that there will be less black areas. Now we build up the flesh tone base with more dry brushing. You may use any flesh tone, but I recommend you use a smaller dry brush. As usual, you apply this in multiple passes, building more on the top areas. I always say this in my dry brushing videos, do not wick the paint off the dry brush too much because if the brush is too dry, it will be very time consuming and it's not worth your time. Now here is the main trick when doing dry brushing. If you want smooth transitions, I said this in one of my oldest dry brushing videos which is like more than 3 years ago. If you treat dry brushing like it's basic layering, meaning you use a lot of colors, then you will have nice subtle gradations. So forget about moist dry brushing because that can potentially rub off the previous layer. Moist dry brushing is pointless in my opinion because it adds complexity to something that is supposedly very simple. Now we are dry brushing the final highlights of the skin. You could apply less of this color, but since we plan to use a ton of washes, I wanted the base to be very bright. If you're painting an army, you may skip a few of the colors that we use. You may skip the midtones so that the painting is faster. Now we glaze with speed paint. We are using Crusader skin. This is the reason why we opted for a brighter base color because Crusader skin can be very dark sometimes. As usual, use a big brush and work fast so that you won't produce coffee stains. And if you stop on certain sections, just make sure to blend the edges. I prefer using speed paint medium when blending the edges of speed paints, but you may use water. You may apply a second round of Crusader skin on the shadow areas. This will give your painting more volume. Just make sure to let the previous layer dry before applying a second pass. Now we're painting dark purple on the other parts of the miniature. This will be the base of our metallics later. So make sure to clean the areas in between the skin and the other parts of the miniature. Now we have a typical skin painting. It looks pretty okay, but it's typical skin color. Now I think this looks way better than black and white slop chop or even zenithal underpainting. Now if you find value out of this video, do give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel. You see, the problem with basic slop chop or even our double slop chop sometimes is that Crusader skin over black and white underpainting just doesn't look as good. Sometimes speed paints over black and gray areas are not very nice. Now this part is optional, but with proper technique, this will only take you around 10 to 15 minutes. For really smooth glazing, I always say that you thin down your Warpaints Fanatic roughly around 3 parts stabilizer and 1 part paint. But here, we just thinned it down 1:1 so that we have more opacity, meaning less time consuming. More opacity means though that your painting will be not as smooth. But I highly recommend you apply this via stippling so that you don't need to blend. Although I'm using pearl white here, thinned with Warpaint stabilizer, you may also use white. Thin down pearl skin looks better though than thin down white over our skin base color. Apply at least a couple of passes for better results. If you're not comfortable thinning down your paints for glazing, you may do this step via feathering. Feathering is simply applying paint with very light stroke, and it's not dry brushing but it's kinda similar, but I do prefer glazing. Also, it's important to note that you don't need very smooth highlights here or glazes. The highlights just serve as foundation for our washes. We apply a ton of washes here, not just these 3 washes, but we will start with military green and green tone washes. The green tones will, desaturate our skin tones. Notice that I don't apply the washes on the highlight areas as much as I can. Although, I do blend the edges of the highlighting to get better transitions or a smoother finish. This part of the painting can be the most time consuming because it's simply so much fun to paint with washes. Army painter washes are very nice, but sometimes they can be too subtle depending on what you want to achieve. Since the washes are more subtle, you have to apply in multiple passes, unlike speed paints. Now you see me here getting impatient because I want more green tones on the skin. So we're using algae green thinned down with speed paint medium. Be careful in over-thinning your speed paints because if you thin too much, you'll end up with consistency and opacity like the washes. So over-thinned speed paints is pointless. You might as well just use washes. Now you see in the video, I'm using speed paint medium to thin down the speed paint. I'm not using the medium here to add more transparency to the speed paint, but I'm using it to slow down the drying time. The slower drying time will allow you to blend the edges of speed paints more effectively. Now you could see in the video that we're getting faster results than using washes, but again, use speed paint medium to get more control. Now with the help of thin down speed paints, this part of the painting became faster than just using washes. Now after this part, I wanted a little bit more red, so I went back to using washes. Magenta tone wash, red tone wash, dark red tone wash, and even a bit of sepia wash. Now, before my final thoughts, a huge thanks to all my patrons at Patreon, Hajime Model Studio, and of course, the Army Painter for making this video possible. Now it's a matter of just painting the rest of the miniature with metallics and also applying a few more washes on the skin to make it have more color depth. It's arguable that painting rotting skin is the easiest in terms of painting skin. The hardest would be female skin and maybe black skin or dark skin. Well, I think dark skin could be the hardest because you need to paint a lot of highlights. Looking at the finished model, we could add a little bit more highlights on the skin and maybe a few shades on the armor parts. But I'm pretty happy with the result. Especially since I think we only spent an hour in the painting of this Trench Crusade looking miniature. I think our chop suey method is getting us pretty good results, and I have another skin painting video after this video before we paint Mortarion. Oh, but I can't really paint Mortarion yet unless I finish the painting tutorials for our The Black Tide Kickstarter. Oh, lastly, a huge thanks to all of you guys, my viewers, my subscribers. We just hit 54,000 subscribers and we're growing fairly fast. The dream is to hit, of course, 100K and I hope it will happen very soon. Also, I'll have a video on painting metallic armor with the Army Painter metallic paints from the Warpaints Fanatic range since, as you can see in the video, they look really good. That's it, Pansit. I hope you like this video. Do like, comment, subscribe, and all that stuff. Until next video, guys. Bye!